The physical sun and sky environment map simulates natural daylight. It's great for lighting studies because we can plug in geographic coordinates and date and time information and see what our architecture would look like at that location and time. We can also manually control the sun position and art direct a lot of other parameters to achieve a variety of lighting effects. Currently, I've got a scene with no environment and exposure control is off. If we go into the rendering menu and open up the environment and effects dialog, no environment, no exposure control. The sun and sky environment is controlled by the sun positioner light type. And this is a little bit different from other light types in Max. The sun positioner is not actually the source of light. It's a manipulator to control the procedural environment map. So let's create the sun positioner, and that will also create the environment map. Go into the Create panel, to Lights, Photometric, click Sun Positioner. Go over to the top view, and click and hold the mouse and drag outward. While you're holding that down and dragging it, you're setting the radius. You can see that over in the Create panel. The radius is changing. Release the mouse. And don't click, but just move the mouse around. We're not holding the button down, just moving the mouse. We can see that the compass rose is following the mouse. We are now entering in a value for the north offset parameter. The north offset parameter will affect the lighting. I want to start off with a neutral rotation for the compass rose. I'll set the north offset to 0, and then click the mouse. And again, don't drag, but just move the mouse. And you're setting the distance. And that does not affect the lighting. So set that to whatever's convenient and click to complete that compass rose or sun positioner. And we're still in the sun positioner tool, and we certainly don't want to create another sun. So right-click to exit out of that tool. We see in the viewports now, in standard mode, our viewports are overexposed. In the Environment and Effects dialog, we have something in the environment map. It's the physical sun and sky environment. And also, very importantly, exposure control is enabled by default. Previously in the course, we discussed the problems with exposure control, specifically that we cannot turn off the tone mapping effect. We'll get back to that in a minute, but let's try to get our viewports looking a little bit better. We're seeing the environment in the background right now. Let's switch that to a solid color. Go to the Views menu, Viewport Background, Configure Viewport Background. In this dialog, in the Background tab, choose Use Custom User Interface Solid Color and click Apply to All Views in Active Layout tab. And click OK to close that dialog. Now we're seeing the viewport background instead of the environment, and our shot is not overexposed in the viewports. We're still getting reflections from the environment here. If that bugs us, we can turn that off going into the Shading menu to Per View Presets. And in here, turn off reflections from environment, and that will kind of clean up our rendering a little bit in the viewport so it's not so overlit. And we can close that dialog. So now let's see what this looks like in an active shade render. So let's click in the perspective view and click Active Shade on the main toolbar. I set this up so that it's going to render whichever viewport we click in. So Active Shade looks good, and exposure control is still enabled. We can orbit around or tumble in our perspective view. Click in that view to give it focus, and Alt and middle mouse to tumble or orbit. And we can look around, and there is in fact a sun and sky, and there's even a sun disk up there somewhere. There it is. Okay, so that's working all right. Let's select the camera viewport, and now that's the one that's going to appear in the active shade rendering. And let's make some adjustments. First of all, I said I want to turn off exposure control, so let's do that. No exposure control. And immediately it's overlit in our active shade render. But that's easy to fix. We can just adjust the intensity of the environment. We need the material editor for that. So open up the material editor from its button on the main toolbar, or use the keyboard shortcut, which is M. We want to drag our environment map over into the material editor window and choose Instance. Double-click on that physical sun and sky environment node And we've got the overall global intensity. So let's bring that down. Drag on the spinner and reduce that, and we can see how we're able to control the brightness. It's a pretty sensitive parameter there. Let's bring it down to a value of 0.02. Now we've got a pretty good exposure in our active shade. There are a whole bunch of other parameters in here, including got the ability to tint the overall environment or change the color of the ground or change the type of illuminance model and so on. I'm going to leave all of those parameters at their defaults and just close the material editor. Now let's look at the controls on the sun positioner. We don't need this environment and effects dialog either. Select the sun positioner and then right-click in the camera viewport so you don't lose that selection, but give focus to the camera so it'll render an active shade. Go to the Modify panel. In the sun positioner parameters, we have sun position. And we can choose date, time, and location, a weather data file, or manual. Let's first plug in a date, time, and location. So that's the default. Let's set the time to 1400 hours, or 2 p.m. And the month to September, that's month 9. And the year, 2021. And we're getting a particular look in our rendering. The location on Earth is currently San Francisco. Let's click on that button. And we get a geographic location dialog. And here we can just select something on the map. We could choose some other location in the world. I'll stick with North America. And I can also choose from a list of cities here. I'm going to choose Tucson, Arizona. Scroll down to that. And here it is, Tucson, Arizona. And click OK. All right, now I know exactly what this lighting is going to look like on a clear sunny day at this time and date in this location. If we wanted to do a cloudy day, we would have to go into the parameters for the sun and sky, reduce the intensity of the sun relative to the sky, increase the size of the sun so it would look like it was a cloudy day, and so on. So there's a lot to play with in there. If we want a manual control, all we do is switch it over to manual. And then at the very bottom, we have horizontal coordinates. Azimuth is the position on the horizon, and altitude is height above the horizon. Let's play around with these. So I'll bring this altitude down and see it's going to move the sun in our viewport and also change the position of shadows. We'll try an azimuth of 220. And then we've got the altitude. I can click and drag on that and bring the sun down. And now we're getting sundown effect. Maybe bring in altitude down to 20 degrees. And now it's golden hour. And once again, we could go back into the physical sun and sky parameters in the material editor and art direct this further. I'm going to set this back to the sunny day I had with an azimuth of 200 and an altitude of 56 degrees. That's how to quickly set up natural day lighting using the sun positioner and the physical sun and sky environment.